The sun was a distant memory in the oppressive world of Ashvale, where faceless soldiers patrolled the streets and every corner was under surveillance. Once a thriving city, Ashvale had become a prison, with its youngest inhabitants as the inmates. Among them were 6 teenagers, their spirits unbroken despite the brutal regime that had torn them from their families. Leona, their determined leader, stared out of the barred window of their barracks, her mind a whirlwind of escape plans. For months, she had been meticulously gathering intelligence, observing the guards, and rallying her friends. Victor, the strategist with an uncanny ability to find weak spots, Harper, whose quiet demeanor hid an unyielding loyalty, Rylan, whose brute strength made him the group's muscle, and the twins, Elara and Finn, who were masters of creating distractions, were all with her. Together, they formed an unbreakable bond forged by hardship and shared suffering. "We leave tonight," Leona whispered, her voice resolute but tinged with the anxiety of what was to come. "Daddy." The others nodded, their eyes reflecting the same fierce determination. As night enveloped the city, the group made their move. They crept through the dark corridors of the barracks, their footsteps barely audible against the cold stone floor. Every shadow could be a threat, every sound could give them away, but they moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed drill. The guards' routines had been memorized, and they slipped past them with practiced ease. When they reached the outer wall, Victor quickly went to work on the security system, his fingers moving deftly over the controls. Seconds felt like hours until, finally, the gate creaked open, and they dashed into the night. But freedom was not just a matter of escaping the walls. The regime was ruthless, and their absence was quickly noticed. Alarms blared, echoing through the empty streets like the wail of a dying beast. The teenagers ran, their hearts pounding as they dodged patrols and sought refuge in the shadows. The once familiar city had become a labyrinth of danger, where every turn could be their last. Leona led them with unwavering resolve, her mind racing through the next steps. There was no time to think about the fear gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. She had to focus on the mission, finding allies within the city's underground resistance. As they darted through the alleyways, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Each decision could mean the difference between life and death. Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed from the end of the street. Leona raised a hand, signaling the group to stop. They pressed against the cold brick walls, their breaths shallow as the patrol drew closer. The soldiers' heavy footsteps reverberated in the silence, a reminder of the ever-present threat that loomed over them. Leona's heart raced, but her expression remained stoic, her eyes locked on the approaching figures. "Stay calm," she whispered, barely audible. "Daddy." The group nodded, trusting her judgment. The patrol passed by, oblivious to the group hidden in the shadows. The teenagers exhaled in unison, a brief moment of relief washing over them. But they knew it was only temporary. The city was a war zone, and they were deep behind enemy lines. As they continued their escape, the sense of urgency grew. Every step was a gamble, every decision a potential mistake. But they had no choice. Their freedom, their very lives, depended on the success of this mission. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for all those who had been oppressed by the regime. This was their only chance to break free and ignite the spark of rebellion. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, but as they disappeared into the night, one thing was clear: they would not be caught easily. Their fight had just begun, and they were willing to risk everything for a chance at justice, a chance to reclaim the lives that had been stolen from them. The city's underbelly was a labyrinth of crumbling tunnels and forgotten passages, a dark sanctuary for those who had slipped through the regime's iron grip. Here, Leona and her friends found temporary refuge, but freedom came with a heavy price. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the cold, rough walls pressed in on them, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked above. Supplies were dwindling, and every creak or distant echo set their nerves on edge. The strain of survival was beginning to take its toll, and the weight of responsibility sat heavily on Leona's shoulders. As they huddled together one night in a drafty, makeshift shelter, Harper's voice broke the uneasy silence. "What's the plan, Leona? We can't keep running like this forever," she said, her voice wavering with exhaustion. "Daddy." Leona stared at the dirt-covered floor, her thoughts a tangled web of doubts and fears. She had led them this far, but now, the path ahead seemed more uncertain than ever. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could find the words, a deafening explosion shattered the silence. The entrance to their hideout was blown apart, sending debris flying in all directions. In the blink of an eye, Soldiers swarmed into the room, their weapons gleaming ominously in the dim light. Chaos erupted as the teenagers scrambled to defend themselves. Rylan, driven by raw adrenaline, charged at the soldiers with all his might. His fists flew, landing powerful blows, but the sheer number of enemies overwhelmed him. Ilara and Finn darted through the confusion, trying to create distractions, but it was clear they were outmatched. Victor attempted to hack into the soldiers' communication systems to disrupt their coordination, but there was no time. They were being pushed back, and it seemed like capture was inevitable. Just when all hope seemed lost, a figure emerged from the shadows. He moved with a deadly grace, his scarred face illuminated by the sporadic flashes of gunfire. His eyes, hard as steel, held the weight of countless battles. It was Damon, the enigmatic leader of the resistance. With a single, sharp command, his followers surged forward, engaging the soldiers with ruthless precision. The tide of the battle turned in an instant, and the soldiers, unprepared for such fierce resistance, were quickly subdued. "You've got guts, kids," Damon said, his voice gravelly but laced with a hint of respect, "Steady." He surveyed the battered group, his eyes narrowing as he assessed their condition. "But guts alone won't keep you alive out here." Leona, her breath still ragged from the fight, looked up at Damon, determination burning in her eyes. "We don't just want to survive. We want to fight. We want to end this," she said, her voice unwavering, "Steady." Damon's gaze softened slightly as he studied her. He saw not just a scared teenager, but a young leader with fire in her heart. After a long pause, he nodded. "If you want to fight, you're going to need training." "Real training," he said, his tone firm, "Steady." Without another word, Damon led them deeper into the underground, through a series of twisting tunnels that seemed to go on forever. Finally, they arrived at a massive hidden chamber, the heart of the Resistance's operations. The room buzzed with activity. Men and women of all ages were preparing weapons, planning strategies, and tending to the wounded. It was a stark contrast to the desolation they had left behind. The days that followed were grueling. Under Damon's relentless watch, Leona and her friends were pushed to their limits and beyond. They trained from dawn until dusk, learning to fight with both their hands and their minds. Victor honed his skills in cyber warfare, while Harper became a master of stealth and reconnaissance. Ryland's strength was refined into a disciplined force, and the twins perfected their roles as saboteurs and infiltrators. But as they grew stronger, so too did the regime. The resistance was constantly on the move, their bases under threat as the regime tightened its grip on Ashvale. Damon warned them that time was running out. The enemy was closing in, and soon they would have to make their stand. Late one night, as the group gathered around a dimly lit table, Damon laid out the plans for their first major operation. "We've got a chance to strike a critical blow against the regime, but it's risky. If we fail, it could be the end of the resistance," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come, "Steady." Leona looked around at her friends, each of them showing the scars of their recent battles, but also a newfound strength. They were no longer just survivors, they were soldiers in a war for freedom. "We're ready," Leona said, her voice filled with resolve, "Steady." The others nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. Damon studied them for a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Then let's show them what we're made of," he said, a fierce glint in his eyes, "Steady." As they prepared for the mission ahead, the price of freedom became all too clear. But for Leona and her friends, there was no turning back. They had chosen their path, and they would see it through, no matter the cost. The day of reckoning had arrived, the moment they had all dreaded yet anticipated. The Resistance's base, once hidden beneath the layers of Ashvale's ruins, was now under siege. The ground trembled as explosions erupted across the city, turning the once silent night into a cacophony of chaos. The scent of burning rubble filled the air, mingling with the cries of both the desperate and the defiant. Leona, hardened by the trials she had endured, rallied her group. "This is it," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "Steady. We fight not just for ourselves, but for Ashvale. For every life this regime has destroyed." They moved as one unit, a testament to the months of grueling training they had undergone. Ryland charged ahead, his fists crashing into the enemy with the force of a battering ram. His raw strength was a sight to behold, an unstoppable force as he cleared the path for the others. Beside him, Victor directed the battle with the precision of a master tactician, his mind calculating every move, every counter, with unerring accuracy. Harper, Ilara, and Finn flanked them, their synchronization perfect. Harper's sharpshooting kept the enemy at bay, while the twins, agile and quick, wove in and out of the chaos, setting traps and creating diversions that threw the regime's soldiers into disarray. But despite their efforts, the regime's forces were overwhelming. The resistance was outnumbered, and it became clear that brute strength alone wouldn't secure their victory. Leona, eyes scanning the battlefield, understood that the key to winning this fight lay in strategy, not sheer power. "Victor!" Leona called out, her voice resolute amidst the turmoil. "Daddy, we need to take out their command center. It's the only way to stop them from coordinating this assault." Victor didn't hesitate. "I know the way, Daddy," as he gestured for the others to follow. They moved swiftly, cutting through the fray toward the heart of the regime's operations. The command center was a fortress within a fortress, heavily guarded by the regime's elite soldiers. The path to it was perilous, each step a dance with death. But Leona and her team fought with the ferocity of those who had nothing left to lose. As they approached the entrance, the tension in the air thickened, each heartbeat a reminder of what was at stake. When they finally breached the command center's inner sanctum, Leona found herself face to face with the regime's commander. The woman stood tall and imposing, her eyes as cold and calculating as the steel walls surrounding them. She had been the mastermind behind the regime's brutal tactics, the one responsible for the suffering of so many. Leona leveled her weapon, her gaze unwavering. "This ends now," she said, her voice filled with the weight of every life lost. "Daddy." The commander laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "You're just children playing at war, Daddy. You have no idea what real power is." Leona's grip tightened on her weapon. "We're more than that, Daddy. We're the voices of everyone you've silenced. And today, we speak for them." Without another word, Leona pulled the trigger. The blast echoed in the confined space, a final punctuation to the struggle that had consumed their lives. The command center erupted in a shower of sparks and flames, the destruction of the regime's nerve center reverberating throughout Ashvale. The explosion was the signal the resistance had been waiting for. Across the city, the tide of battle turned as the regime's forces faltered, their coordination shattered. The resistance fighters, fueled by a newfound hope, pressed their advantage, driving the enemy back. But victory came at a steep cost. As the smoke began to clear, Leona looked around at the ruins of the command center, her heart heavy. They had won, but the losses were staggering. Friends, comrades, many had fallen in the final push for freedom. Leona stood among the wreckage, the weight of their sacrifice pressing down on her. Ashvale was free, but the scars of this war would run deep. The city would never be the same, and neither would they. Yet, even in the midst of this devastation, something remarkable emerged: hope. It flickered in the eyes of the survivors, in the determination etched on their faces. They had fought for a future, and now, against all odds, that future was theirs to shape. Leona turned to her friends, the ones who had fought beside her, bled beside her. They were battered, bruised, but alive. And together they would rebuild. They would ensure that the horrors they had endured would never be repeated. "We did it," Finn whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Daddy." Leona nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is just the beginning, Daddy. We've taken back our city. Now, we take back our lives." I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.